Welcome to Terrormouth, where the night doesn't just hold secrets, it remembers them. Story 1. The Midnight Figure of Pine Hollow. Pine Hollow, a tiny town tucked deep in northern Maine, was the kind of place where the fog seemed to seep into the bones and silence. It was more than just the absence of sound, it was alive. Locals claimed the forest surrounding the town had a presence, something that watched, waited, and sometimes followed those who dared wander too close. Most dismissed these stories as old folk tales, exaggerations fueled by isolation, cold nights, and the town's long history of unexplained vanishings. Ethan Miller, 28, had lived in Pine Hollow all his life. He worked as a delivery driver, navigating the town's winding roads late at night. He prided himself on being rational, dismissing whispers about midnight watchers and forest spirits as nonsense. But one October night changed everything. He was driving along Old Mill Road, a narrow path lined with towering pines whose branches interlocked overhead, creating tunnels of darkness. The fog was unusually thick that night, clinging to the asphalt and curling round his tires. Ethan's headlights cut swaths of light through the grey mist, but visibility was almost nil beyond 20 feet. His radio crackled intermittently with static, even though he had tuned it to a working station. Around 11:45 p.m., as he approached a sharp bend near the abandoned Weaver cabin, he saw it, a tall, thin figure standing motionless at the edge of the road. At first, he thought it was a hitchhiker, but a wave of unease immediately hit him. The figure's posture was unnatural, stiff yet jerky, like a marionette whose strings had snapped. Its head tilted in a slow, deliberate motion, and its face was hidden in shadow, though faint. Eerie glows marked where its eyes should have been. Ethan slowed the truck, instinctively gripping the wheel tighter. The figure didn't move toward him. It simply observed. The fog thickened around the road, curling unnaturally at the treetops. He noticed the temperature had dropped sharply, breathed misting inside the truck, and the heater struggling against an invisible chill. Even the radio went completely dead, replaced by a low, vibrating hum that seemed to come from inside his skull. He thought about reversing, turning away, escaping, but when he attempted it, the road seemed to stretch endlessly ahead. The figure stepped onto the asphalt, its limbs elongated unnaturally, bending in impossible angles. Each motion was fluid, horrifyingly inhuman. Shadows flickered at the edges of his vision, twisting like living smoke. The hum grew louder, pulsating in time with his heartbeat. Ethan floored the accelerator, praying the figure would remain behind. But every turn, every curve, the figure was always ahead, appearing suddenly, almost teleporting, watching silently, impossibly fast. At one point, he glimpsed it perched on the roof of the truck as he passed under a low branch, only for it to vanish the instant he blinked. Panic surged, a cold sweat soaking him despite the autumn chill. Finally, after what felt like hours, though only minutes had passed, he reached the outskirts of town. The figure stopped at the forest's edge and melted into the darkness. The fog lifted, warmth returned, and the radio came back to life as if nothing had happened. But Ethan's hands shook, and he could not shake the feeling of being observed even in the safety of his well-lit garage. Over the next few weeks, strange occurrences continued. Animals avoided the forest. Local kids claimed to see a tall shadow watching them from between the trees. Ethan himself would see fleeting movements in the corner of his eyes, a figure standing silently by the tree line, glowing eyes peeking from the mist. On some nights, He could hear whispers, distorted, almost human, calling his name, but no one else heard them. Ethan spoke to locals, but most shrugged or laughed nervously, sharing tales of similar experiences over decades. Glowing eyes at the edge of the forest, figures on roads at midnight, and a pervasive sense of being watched. Pine Hollow had its secrets, and some of them were older than the town itself. Some whispered the forest was alive, sentient, and had chosen certain people as observers or prey. By the time Halloween arrived, Ethan had not slept well for weeks. He avoided driving alone at night, yet the feeling of being followed never left. Even in daylight, he felt the presence lurking behind him in shadows, between trees, and in the fog that sometimes crept into town. The town's eerie legends weren't just stories, they were warnings, and Ethan had seen enough to know that curiosity, timing, and courage would not protect anyone who crossed paths with the forest after midnight. The nights in Pine Hollow had grown heavier, oppressive. Fog rolled in earlier, thicker, curling around homes and streets like fingers reaching from the forest. Ethan Miller tried to maintain a semblance of normal life, but the memory of the figure haunted every shadow, every whisper of the wind. He wasn't alone. Others began reporting similar sightings, glowing eyes on back roads, tall shapes that melted into the mist, and whispers calling out from the trees. One night, determined to confront what had stalked him, Ethan returned to Old Mill Road with a small group of trusted friends. They carried flashlights, cameras, and handheld recorders, hoping to capture proof, at least understand what they were facing. The air was unnaturally cold, their breaths fogging in front of them. The forest seemed to exhale with each step, fog rolling from the trees in wave after wave as they neared the bend where Ethan first saw the figure. Something impossible happened. The trees themselves seemed to shift, bending toward the road as if watching. The fog thickened so that even their closest companions became hazy shapes. Then, in the distance, the figure appeared. Taller than any human, limbs elongated and bending unnaturally, eyes glowing with a pale, unnatural light. It did not move forward but simply stood, observing. Then, without warning, the figure split into several silhouettes, each one copying its motions, surrounding the group. Shadows stretched across the road, pulsating like living things. The friends tried to retreat, but the fog twisted the path, turning familiar trees into a labyrinth. Every turn led them back to the clearing where the figure awaited. Silent but aware of their every heartbeat, Ethan tried speaking, pleading for understanding. But the whispers came first low, distorted, layering voices of those who had vanished in Pine Hollow over decades. The fog seemed to carry memories of past victims, each one pressing into his mind. The figure bent its head, and the silhouettes mimicked him, mirroring fear, confusion, and desperation. Then the unthinkable happened. One of Ethan's friends vanished, pulled into the fog, screams swallowed instantly by the forest. Another disappeared moments later, leaving only a cold, lingering shadow on the asphalt. Panic surged through the remaining group. Ethan realized that the entity wasn't just observing, it was collecting, choosing, marking, summoning every ounce of courage. Ethan ran toward the figure, camera in hand, hoping that confrontation might break the spell. The figure recoiled slightly, as if startled, and for a moment the forest seemed to hold its breath. But then the figure reached forward, not with hands, but with elongated, shifting limbs that blurred in motion. The air pulsed around him, and Ethan felt his vision fracture, Flashes of past disappearances, distorted faces, and glowing eyes, all trapped in a space between reality and nightmare. When he stumbled backward, he found himself alone on the road. The fog had cleared slightly, leaving the night eerily still. His friends were gone. The figure had vanished, but the oppressive sense of being watched remained. Ethan ran to town, arriving hours later, breathless and terrified, unable to explain fully what had occurred. In the weeks that followed, Pine Hollow became cautious. Residents avoided the forest at night. Stories spread quickly, older than any warnings previously given, claiming that certain entities existed to harvest attention, curiosity, and fear. Ethan's encounter became both a warning and a mystery. He survived, but he could never fully shake the feeling that the figure was still observing him, waiting for the next moment, the next victim drawn to the foggy roads of Pine Hollow. Even today, late at night, headlights cutting through thick mist may catch the brief, towering silhouette of a figure on Old Mill Road. It waits silently, watching the living, marking those who dare to wander into the forest after midnight. Ethan knew one truth. Some midnight encounters weren't mere sightings, they were invitations. And once accepted, there was no telling who or what would return. Story 2: The Vanishing Lights of Cedar Ridge. Cedar Ridge was a town that prided itself on its tranquility. Nestled in a valley in upstate New York, the streets were narrow, lined with old maples and oaks whose branches formed near tunnels above the road. Life was slow, quiet, predictable, until the lights began to appear. It started as a rumor among teenagers. Strange, glowing orbs drifting silently through the woods behind the old mill, hovering just above the ground, moving deliberately yet without sound. Most adults dismissed it as pranksters with flashlights, but a few had seen something different. One autumn night, 32-year-old Marissa Kane, a local journalist, decided to investigate. She had been covering small-town oddities for years, but never encountered anything she couldn't explain. That night, she drove her small sedan along the road bordering the forest, headlights slicing through the thick fog that had rolled in unexpectedly. Around 11:30 p.m., Marissa saw the first light. At first, she thought it was a reflection or a distant lantern, but as she drew closer, it hovered in the middle of the road, spherical, perfectly smooth, and glowing a pale, unearthly blue. The light didn't flicker like fire or lead, nor did it cast shadows in the usual way it seemed to illuminate the air around it, but only partially, as though reality itself bent around it. Marissa stopped the car, heart hammering, reaching for her camera. The orb moved slowly, deliberately, yet with an unnatural grace. As she stepped out to get a better look, the temperature dropped drastically. Her breath was visible in clouds, even though the night had been mild. Then, the orb pulsed and split into several smaller lights, forming a semicircle around her, hovering just above the damp forest floor. A strange buzzing filled the air, low and resonant, vibrating through her chest. The trees around her seemed to twist subtly, almost imperceptibly, their shadows stretching and shifting in impossible directions. Marissa lifted her camera, snapping photos, but every shot came out blurry, the lights distorted as if resisting capture. Suddenly, one of the lights shot upward at impossible speed, disappearing into the canopy, and in that moment, Marissa realized she wasn't alone. From the edge of the woods, a tall, shadowed figure stepped forward, moving unnaturally, fluidly, like it was gliding over the ground. The figure's eyes glowed faintly, matching the hue of the orbs. Marissa froze, paralyzed by a mixture of fear and awe. The figure raised one arm, and the orbs responded, floating higher, moving closer. The buzzing intensified, and Marissa felt her knees weaken. She stumbled backward, almost tripping over a tree root, and in that instant, the orbs darted forward. Not attacking, but almost observing, scanning. She felt an invasive awareness, a consciousness not human in scale, studying her, as if trying to determine her purpose. After what felt like eternity, the lights and the figure retreated slowly into the forest. The fog lifted slightly, the temperature normalized, and the night returned to its quiet, deceptive calm. Marissa ran to her car, slamming the door, fumbling with the keys. She never turned on the engine until she was safely back on the main road. For days afterward, she tried to convince herself it was a hallucination, fatigue, or optical illusion. But her photos, though mostly distorted, had one frame where the figure's eyes gleamed unnaturally through the fog, a proof she couldn't explain. Local residents began mentioning strange lights again, and a few warned her she had stirred something in the woods. Something that didn't like being watched. Marissa now faced an impossible question. Were these encounters purely paranormal? A form of intelligence beyond comprehension? Or something even stranger? Something that wanted to make itself known, but only on its terms? The night of the vanishing lights had left her shaken, but she knew instinctively it wasn't over. After her first encounter, Marissa Kane couldn't sleep. Each night, the image of those glowing orbs and the shadowed figure haunted her dreams. They weren't just lights, they were intelligent, deliberate, and aware. She kept replaying the moment when the orbs had scanned her, that invasive awareness, and the figure's glowing eyes that seemed to peer into her very soul. Days later, the town's quiet unease escalated. Reports came in, lights hovering above backyards, moving silently along streets, occasionally forming shapes that resembled figures or faces. Animals acted strangely, barked incessantly, birds avoided the streets, and cats refused to venture outside. People whispered of the Watchers, a phrase that sent shivers through those who mentioned it. Marissa couldn't resist returning. She equipped herself with night vision cameras, infrared sensors, and a high-powered flashlight. This time, she brought a companion, her friend Lucas, a photographer skeptical of supernatural claims, but fascinated by the phenomenon. They arrived at the edge of the forest at midnight, the same fog curling round the tree trunks as before. For the first hour, nothing happened. The forest was unnaturally silent. The only sounds there, shallow breaths and the occasional crack of a branch underfoot. Then, a faint glow appeared between the trees, soft at first, then intensifying, hovering above the ground. Multiple orbs emerged, moving in a deliberate pattern, forming a ring around them, pulsating with a rhythm that felt almost alive. Suddenly, the tallest figure stepped out from the woods. It was taller than any human, thin and fluid, limbs bending unnaturally. Its eyes glowed faintly blue, matching the orbs. Marissa's blood ran cold as the figure raised an arm. The orbs shot upward and then converged into one, hovering above the figure's head, spinning faster, casting eerie light across the forest floor. Lucas tried to speak, but the sound caught in his throat. The air grew dense, vibrating with low-frequency hums that made their teeth ache. Then, the orbs darted closer, not attacking, but surrounding them in a circle. Marissa felt her thoughts twist. Memories overlapping visions of past disappearances in Cedar Ridge, townsfolk who had vanished without trace over decades, faces of people she knew, distorted, merging with the shadows. Panic surged. Marissa realized the lights were not just observing, they were trying to communicate, to show, or perhaps to lure. The figure's eyes locked onto hers, and she felt a wave of understanding. The forest had guardians, entities that did not belong to the human world. They existed in a parallel layer of reality, intersecting with ours only briefly, and anyone who intruded too closely risked being taken into their domain. In a desperate move, Marissa and Lucas turned and ran toward the road. The orbs followed, but they weren't chasing, they guided, directing them through the fog. Suddenly, a figure appeared directly in front of the road, blocking their path. Time seemed to stretch. Marissa raised her flashlight, and, for a heartbeat, the figure recoiled an almost human hesitation in its inhuman form. Then, just as quickly, the fog lifted, the lights vanished, and the figure was gone. The forest returned to normal. Trembling, exhausted, they sprinted back to the town. Every street light felt too bright, too solid after the surreal glow of the forest orbs. The next morning, Marissa checked her cameras. Most of the footage was corrupted, static-filled, distorted. But one frame stood out, the figure's eyes glimmering, not angry, not malevolent, curious, watching, waiting. In the following weeks, Cedar Ridge saw fewer reports, but the fear lingered. Marissa's story spread. Warnings whispered among the townsfolk. Never wander alone at midnight near the forest. Never stare too long at the lights. Never attempt to follow them. Those who did sometimes vanished. Marissa knew she had glimpsed something far older and stranger than she could explain. The orbs and their shadowed guardian weren't just phenomena, they were a presence. A force that existed just outside the veil of reality, observing, marking, and occasionally taking. Cedar Ridge would never be the same, and neither would she. Some encounters, she realized, were not meant to end, they were meant to change you forever. Story 3: The Howling Shadows of Willow Creek. Willow Creek was the kind of small town where everyone knew each other, where neighbors waved from porches and the local diner served breakfast like clockwork. But beneath its calm exterior, strange occurrences had begun to stir. Whispers of shadows that moved on their own and chilling. Howls in the dead of night. The first reported incident came from 17-year-old Dylan Hayes, a night shift worker at the town's gas station. Around 2 a.m., he noticed flickering lights outside, but when he looked closer, the street lamps themselves seemed to bend slightly, elongating their shadows unnaturally across the pavement. From the darkness between the buildings, low, guttural howls echoed, not like wolves, not like coyotes, but something inhuman, resonating deep in the chest. Over the next week, more sightings surfaced. Shadows, tall, distorted, humanoid, were glimpsed moving along the alleyways, slipping from one dimly lit corner to another. Some residents claimed the shadows mimicked them, copying gestures, movements, even expressions, but with twisted, elongated forms. Fear spread quickly, but no one could explain the phenomenon. Hannah Cross, a local historian and amateur paranormal investigator, decided to document the occurrences. She began walking the streets at night with infrared cameras, motion sensors, and audio recorders. On her third night, she ventured to the old mill at the edge of town, the location most often associated with the sightings. Fog rolled thickly over the cobblestone road, obscuring her path. The howls began softly at first, distant, almost mournful, then rising in a crescendo that made her skin crawl. Hannah paused near the mill and noticed a shadow detach itself from the fog. It was taller than any human, its shape shifting subtly as if made of liquid darkness. Its head tilted unnaturally, observing her. The shadow began to creep closer, stretching along the uneven ground in impossible ways. She tried recording, but her devices malfunctioned, cameras flickered, motion sensors froze, and the audio recorder emitted a high-pitched screech, as if protesting the presence. Hannah felt a chill unlike anything she had ever experienced, her breath caught in icy clouds. Despite the mild autumn night, suddenly, the shadow let out a low, resonating howl. Hannah realized it was not just sound, carried a weight, an intent. The vibrations seemed to seep into her chest and mind, twisting her perception of time and space. She could feel the shadow assessing her, measuring, perhaps even deciding her fate, before she could react further. Another shadow emerged, and then another, until the fog seemed alive with tall, writhing forms. They didn't move with legs, but glided, sliding over the ground and wrapping around the edges of light and darkness. Hannah felt trapped, surrounded, yet the shadows never touched her, they only observed. Her rational mind screamed for her to flee, but she was frozen by a mix of terror and awe. Something about the shadows seemed intelligent. A low, almost imperceptible whisper filled her ears, a voice not entirely human. "Why do you watch?" Hannah backed away, trying to retreat to the safer streets of Willow Creek, but the shadows shifted with her, mirroring each step, an endless echo of dark shapes in the fog. She felt the edges of reality blur, the world stretched, twisted, and became an unfamiliar maze of light, fog, and elongated silhouettes. In the final moments before she escaped the foggy perimeters of the mill, one shadow paused, its head tilted down, and its eyes to faint glimmers in the darkness locked with hers. Hannah felt an icy promise, a warning. This was not the last she would see of Willow Creek's midnight guardians. She ran the rest of the night, documenting as much as she could, but she knew one undeniable truth. The shadows were not random. They were aware, they were watching, and they were patient. And for those who wandered too close to them at midnight, Willow Creek would never be quite the same. The following week. Willow Creek became tense, the air thick with unspoken fear. Residents reported new sightings, shadows twisting unnaturally along their streets, windows flickering with dark shapes that moved against the light. Dogs barked incessantly, refusing to go outside, while cats disappeared for hours. Even the town's mayor, a pragmatic man named Leonard Graves, admitted something unnatural had taken root in their town. Hannah Cross couldn't resist returning. She equipped herself with high-resolution, night vision cameras, thermal imaging, and motion detectors. Her goal, to uncover the nature of these midnight shadows, to prove to herself and the town that something beyond explanation was at work. She convinced two friends, Sam and Tyler, to accompany her on what they would later call the night we shouldn't have returned. Around 11:45 p.m., they approached the old mill. Fog crept over the ground like living smoke, curling around tree trunks and telephone poles. The first howl came a low, resonant sound, vibrating through their chests, freezing the blood in their veins. Then, as if summoned, shadows began to rise from the fog, tall, fluid, and impossibly distorted. Their movements were unnatural, limbs stretching, twisting, gliding, sometimes merging with other shadows, forming semi-human silhouettes. Hannah's heart pounded. She raised her infrared camera, but each device flickered and glitched. The shadows seemed to resist observation, their forms shimmering whenever captured on film. One glided closer, its head tilting unnaturally to study her, eyes faintly glowing. She felt a presence inside her mind, a silent, probing, testing boundaries, assessing fear and intent. Then came the whisper, clear and cold. "You should not have come." It wasn't spoken aloud, but felt as if it slid directly into her thoughts. The friends froze. Even Tyler, usually unshakable, whimpered. The shadows multiplied, surrounding them, each moving independently yet in coordinated harmony. Suddenly, the shadows began mimicking the mirroring gestures, facial expressions, even slight movements of their bodies. The trio realized the shadows were learning, observing, adapting. Panic surged. Hannah screamed for them to run, but the fog seemed to thicken, the path back twisting and elongating unnaturally. Distances stretched, roads turned back on themselves, and for a moment, it felt like the forest itself had become a labyrinth, alive and breathing. Sam tripped and fell. A shadow hovered above him, limbs elongating, bending impossibly close to his face. The whisper returned, sharper this time. "Stay, or join us," Sam screamed, crawling backward, but the shadow pulled away at the last second, as if testing boundaries. Hannah grabbed his arm, yanking him up, and they all stumbled toward the distant glow of the town lights. The moment they crossed the last edge of the fog, the shadows receded. They didn't vanish entirely, they lingered at the forest's edge, watching, waiting, pulsing with faint, unnatural light. The howling faded into the night, leaving only the faint echo in their minds. The friends collapsed on the road, gasping, shaken to their core. Hannah knew that what they had encountered was not random. The shadows were intelligent, patient, and unbound by the rules of reality. They didn't attack indiscriminately, they observed, learned, and occasionally lured the curious into their domain. In the following days, Willow Creek became eerily quiet again, but residents avoided the woods at night. The shadows didn't disappear, they waited, watching, collecting. Hannah later reviewed her footage, finding only static and distorted images, except for one frame, a tall, featureless shadow, eyes glowing faintly, mirrored her own terrified expression perfectly. She knew then that Willow Creek's midnight guardians were no mere legend, they were alive, aware, and relentless. And anyone daring to step too close after dark would be marked, watched, and perhaps never returned. The town returned to its slow, normal routine by day, but the night held a secret, pulsing in the fog, waiting patiently for the next curious soul. Story 4, *The Lantern Man of Black Pine Road. Black Pine Road was a narrow, winding path that twisted through the dense forest outside the town of Mill. Locals avoided it after dark, whispering tales of a strange figure that appeared only at midnight. Man holding a lantern whose light never touched the ground. It started with 19-year-old Lacey Monroe, who had stayed late at her part-time job in town. Driving home along Black Pine Road, she noticed a flickering orange glow between the trees. At first, she thought it was a campfire, but as she drew closer, she realized the figure was walking against the direction of the road, holding a lantern that cast no shadows. The surrounding trees remained pitch black, as if the light itself avoided them. Lacey slowed her car, curious but unnerved. The figure stopped, raised the lantern slightly, and tilted its head toward her. Even from inside the car, she felt a cold weight pressing against her chest. The air grew dense, heavy with the smell of wet earth and decay. As she tried to pass, the lantern man moved, not along the road but toward her car. His steps were silent, yet she felt the vibration of something immense in the air. The light from his lantern flickered across her windshield, and for a fleeting moment she saw a face, or what she thought might be a face. Hollow, black eyes stared at her, mouth slightly open as if whispering, but no sound came. Panic rising, Lacey tried to accelerate, but her engine sputtered. The lantern rose higher, and the figure's shadow or absence of one stretched impossibly along the trees. The world seemed to warp around her, the road elongating, twisting in ways that shouldn't be possible. Then, the lantern's glow widened suddenly, filling her vision. She felt herself being pulled, not physically, but mentally, as if the figure's presence was invading her mind. Thoughts she hadn't had, memories that weren't hers, flickered through her consciousness. A voice, soft, cold, insistent, code, walk with me. Forever? Lacey jerked the wheel, swerving off the road into a ditch. Her car stalled, lights dimming. For a heartbeat, she saw dozens of lanterns in the distance, floating through the forest as if carried by invisible hands. They moved in perfect, silent formation, surrounding her car. Then, just as suddenly, everything went dark. The lanterns vanished. The road was quiet. Her engine roared back to life, and the forest seemed normal again. Except for one thing, her rearview mirror reflected a small lantern glowing faintly inside the car. Shaken, Lacey drove the rest of the way home without looking back. By morning, rumors had spread. She wasn't the first to see the lantern man, and those who tried to describe him always claimed he had the power to draw people into the forest, vanishing without a trace. Some said the lanterns were trapped souls. Others swore the man was older than the town itself, wandering Black Pine Road in search of the next lost traveler. And Lacey knew, deep in her gut, that the lantern man hadn't finished with her. The next night, Lacey couldn't sleep. The memory of the lantern glowing inside her car's rearview mirror haunted her, lingering in every shadow, every corner of her room. By midnight, the feeling of being watched became unbearable. She knew, somehow, that the lantern man wasn't done. Determined to face it or escape, Lacey drove back to Black Pine Road, bringing along her best friend, Aaron, who insisted on helping. The air was colder than usual, the fog thicker, clinging to the trees and the asphalt like wet silk. As they entered the forest, an eerie glow appeared ahead, a single lantern floating mid-air, swinging gently. Though no wind stirred, the lantern man emerged from the mist, taller than before, his face a shifting void of darkness, his eyes hollow pits. He held the lantern high, casting light that revealed nothing, only more shadows, moving like sentient creatures along the trees. Lacey's voice trembled. We don't want trouble." The figure paused, tilting its head. Then it stepped forward, silently. The air grew heavy, compressing their chests, making each breath a struggle. Aaron tried to step out of the car, but found his legs frozen, as if roots had taken hold. From the lantern, a strange, flickering light shot outward, forming thin tendrils of glowing orange that slithered across the road. They wrapped around the tires, the doors, even reaching inside the vehicle. Lacey realized in horror that this wasn't just a man, it was something that could invade reality itself, bending space, twisting minds, drawing the curious closer. Aaron screamed as one of the tendrils brushed his arm. The pain was sharp, electric, yet not physical, more like it burned in his very essence. He shrieked again as his reflection in the side mirror warped into a hollow-eyed version of himself. The lantern man moved closer, tilting the lantern so the light spilled directly on Lacey's face. She felt a pull, a magnetic force drawing her toward the glow, as if her body would rise on its own, walking into the forest. Desperate, Lacey grabbed the car keys and revved the engine. The car jerked forward, breaking the lantern's tendrils that had touched it, but the shadows seemed to flow after them, stretching like dark water. The lantern man tilted his head one last time, and a whisper filled their minds. "We will meet again. The road always calls." They drove as fast as they could, fog chasing them like an entity with teeth. When they finally reached the town lights, the forest seemed still, silent, empty. Lacey dared a glance in the rearview mirror. No lantern, no figure. But when she looked down at her passenger seat, the faint glow of an orange lantern flickered on the floorboard. The next morning, the town spoke in hushed tones. A few locals claimed to have seen new lanterns floating in the forest, swinging silently, waiting for the next travelers who dared drive down Black Pine Road after midnight. Lacey never drove there again, but the haunting glow remained with her in reflections, in the corner of her eye, sometimes even in dreams. She understood one thing clearly: the lantern man wasn't human, wasn't bound by normal rules, and Black Pine Road would forever be a place where curiosity could vanish. Forever, some nights, when the wind whistles through the pines, residents swear they can hear the faint sound of footsteps following the road, accompanied by the slow, rhythmic swinging of a lantern that casts no shadows. Story 5. The Vanishing Bus of Hollow Creek. Hollow Creek was a town seemingly forgotten by time. Its streets were narrow and cracked, its lampposts crooked and flickering, and its buildings carried peeling paint as if decades of neglect had swallowed every trace of life. But when night fell, the town didn't just sleep, it hid secrets in plain sight. Jesse Porter, 17, had grown up hearing rumors. Friends whispered about disappearances. Old-timers spoke of strange lights near the old town square. And there were tales of a bus that appeared only at the stroke of midnight. No driver, no schedule, no explanation. Those who entered it sometimes returned, and sometimes didn't. On a cold autumn night, Jesse was finishing his late shift at the diner. The wind rattled the broken windows as he walked along cracked sidewalks, cutting through the center of town toward home. It was 12:03 a.m., and the fog lay thick like a ghostly blanket. Then, through the mist, he saw Eater Bus, a familiar yellow school bus, yet unlike any he had seen before. Its headlights were dim, casting long, trembling beams through the fog. The engine was idling softly, humming in a tone that seemed wrong, as though the metal itself had a heartbeat. He stopped, staring. The bus doors swung open slowly with a metallic groan. There was no driver. The street behind the bus shimmered strangely, like heat waves on asphalt, but tinted with unnatural orange and green hues. For a moment, the town behind him, the familiar diner, the grocery store, the clock tower seemed to melt into fog. A voice, faint and hollow, drifted from the bus interior. "Come. You don't want to be left behind." Curiosity and dread collided in Jesse's chest, but his feet moved before his mind could protest. He climbed onto the first cold, metal step. Inside, the bus was unnervingly quiet. Rows of seats stretched ahead. No driver, no other passengers. Yet the shadows along the windows seemed to pulse, stretching like living smoke. The windows were fogged, obscuring the outside view, yet through the mist, Jesse saw nothing familiar, only shifting shapes and lights that weren't natural. The bus jolted forward. Unlike any vehicle Jesse had ever ridden, it didn't hum or rot, it glided. The streets outside warped, twisting in impossible curves, buildings tilting and stretching as if reality itself were bending. Jesse felt a weight press on his chest, heavy and suffocating. Then he noticed them figures sitting silently in the seats, headless, or perhaps their faces were simply voids of darkness, yet they radiated awareness, as if they were studying him. Their limbs were elongated, bent at unnatural angles, their postures eerily human yet grotesque. The closer he looked, the more distorted the reflections of himself became in the fogged windows. His own face twisted and stretched, sometimes grinning at him, sometimes gaping open, whispering silently, Where are we going?" Jesse's voice trembled. The bus responded not with sound but with sensation. The vibration of the floor ran through him, seeping into his bones. The fog outside thickened, tendrils of mist curling toward the windows, trying to seep inside. Faint glowing orbs flickered along the warped streets, illuminating the twisted facades of Hollow Creek streets, cracked and empty. The town decayed in an instant, shadows crawling along the walls. The bus stopped abruptly. The doors creaked open, revealing the corrupted town outside. Buildings twisted at impossible angles, lights glowed like embers, and fog poured endlessly into the streets. And there, on the edge of the square, more headless figures emerge, walking slowly but not human. A guttural voice, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once, whispered, "Step out, or remain forever." Jesse froze, heart pounding. He could feel the pull of the bus, the call of the corrupted streets, as if reality itself were tugging at him. Then something moved among the seats. The headless passengers stretched, bending unnaturally toward him. Shadows coiled along the floor, reaching like hands. Jesse understood, in that chilling moment. The bus was not a vehicle, it was a trap, a predator, a doorway between worlds. He had a choice: step into the twisted townscape and risk being consumed by the unknown, or remain inside, trapped forever with the faceless passengers. The engine hummed low, vibrating in perfect rhythm with his racing heartbeat. Outside, lights flickered, fog rolled in waves, and the faint sound of whispers grew louder. Thousands of them, all pleading, laughing, warning. Jesse could feel the bus deciding, testing him, and as the moon vanished behind a cloud, he realized that the vanishing bus of Hollow Creek was not merely a story, it was alive, patient and hungry. Jesse sat frozen as the bus engine hummed like a heartbeat, vibrating through the metal floor. The headless figures in the seats began to sway, stretching their limbs toward him in ways that defied anatomy, their dark voids seeming to pull at his very thoughts. He realized the bus wasn't just transporting him, it was choosing him. The fog outside thickened, condensing into vague forms, faces, screaming mouths, silhouettes of people who had disappeared over the years. Each figure flickered, half here, half somewhere else, like the bus was a bridge between worlds. Whispers slithered into his mind. Come, stay forever. The voices weren't just sounds, they were tendrils, wrapping around his memories, twisting them, replacing familiar faces with hollow voids. Jesse forced himself to breathe, gripping the edges of his seat. His reflection in the window changed again. His eyes hollowed, skin pale, lips cracked into a silent scream. He knew if he looked again, he might cease to be himself. Then the bus screeched to a stop in the middle of the corrupted town square. The doors opened, and Jesse saw the nightmare fully. The town stretched endlessly, buildings twisted impossibly, fog rolling like waves, streetlights burning with molten orange light. Figures headless, faceless, frozen in unnatural poses lined the streets, as if waiting for him. A cold wind swept through the bus, carrying the faint scent of metal and decay. The guttural voice whispered again, "Step out, or remain." Jesse's legs shook uncontrollably. Fear, adrenaline, and instinct warred inside him. He wanted to flee, yet his feet felt glued to the floor. From the mist, one figure stepped forward, taller than the rest. Unlike the headless ones, this figure had a lantern. Much like the stories of Black Pine Road, its glow casting no shadows, bending the fog toward it. The lantern seemed to hum, resonating with the bus itself, and Jesse realized this was the guide, or the master, of the vanishing bus. Summoning all courage, Jesse darted toward the bus doors, swinging open into the nightmare outside. Immediately, the air pressed on him, thick and cold, almost solid. Shadows lashed at his legs, but he stumbled forward, adrenaline giving him strength. He ran, the streets stretching impossibly around him, the town a warped labyrinth. Each step made the whispers grow louder, voices merging into a maddening chorus. Then a hand pail, skeletal, impossibly long, shot out from the fog, brushing his shoulder. Jesse's scream echoed through the twisted streets as he lunged forward. Suddenly, he burst into light. One moment he was in the corrupted Hollow Creek, the next he was standing at the edge of the real town square, under the familiar, flickering lampposts. The bus was gone. The fog vanished. The streets looked normal, but Jesse's chest heaved, and his reflection in the diner window revealed something horrifying. The faintest shadow of a hollow-eyed figure lingered behind him. He thought he was safe, until he returned home. In his bedroom, on the floor beside his bed, lay a single, flickering lantern, the same orange glow from the bus, silent yet undeniably alive. He realized with a shiver that escaping the bus didn't mean escaping it. It was patient. It waited. It chose its next passenger, and one day it would return for him, or for someone else who wandered Hollow Creek. After midnight, locals still whisper about the vanishing bus. They say sometimes, if you walk home late enough, you can hear its engine humming softly in the distance. And sometimes, a flickering lantern appears, glowing faintly in a window, on a porch, or by the roadside, reminding anyone who sees it. Some journeys never truly end. Story 6. The Whispering Woods of Silver Hollow. Silver Hollow was a town forgotten by time, nestled between mountains and endless forests that locals avoided after dark. The woods were ancient, full of trees with gnarled limbs that twisted like grasping hands, their roots curling above the ground like the fingers of the earth itself. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones about the woods, telling stories of people who wandered in after midnight and returned either broken, altered, or never at all. It was a crisp autumn night when 16-year-old Mara Whitfield and her younger brother, Leo, decided to confront the legends. Fueled by curiosity, the thrill of defying rules, and teenage bravado, they snuck out of their home at exactly midnight, flashlights in hand, hearts pounding. The edge of the forest greeted them with shadows deeper than night, the fog curling along the forest floor like smoke. Their flashlights barely cut through the thick darkness, illuminating twisted roots, decayed leaves, and faint shapes that seemed to shift just beyond sight. The air was unnervingly still. Even the usual nocturnal sounds, crickets, rustling leaves, distant owls were absent. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Leo's voice trembled, barely more than a whisper. Mara forced a confident smile, though fear tingled in her spine. "It's just old stories. Just the wind, nothing more." The deeper they ventured, the more the woods seemed alive. The branches above seemed to reach for them, and the path behind vanished into mist. Then came the whispers, faint at first, like voices carried on the wind. They were soft, almost unintelligible, yet they sounded like words trying to form. "Stay. Come, follow." Mara froze, her flashlight trembling in her hand. Leo grabbed her arm, panic setting in. "We shouldn't be here. We need to leave." Then, through the trees, a faint warm glow appeared. It drifted between the trunks like a lantern carried by unseen hands, casting soft amber light that danced across the fog. The siblings felt an inexplicable pull toward it. Mara's legs moved forward before her mind could protest, drawn as if by hypnosis. Leo tried to pull her back, but the light's allure was stronger than fear. The glow led them to a circular clearing where the trees formed a natural cathedral of twisted branches overhead. In the center sat a weathered stone altar, moss-covered and ancient. The whispers grew louder. No longer distant, they came from all directions, echoing inside their minds. "Join us. Stay. Belong." Mara stepped closer. The glow condensed into a figure tall, slender, entirely black, its form both humanoid and otherworldly. No face could be discerned, yet Mara felt it watching her, an intelligence and hunger emanating from the shadow that chilled her to the bone. The figure lifted appendages that could have been arms, gesturing with a deliberate, unnatural grace. Leo grabbed her arm. "Mara, we have to go now." But her legs wouldn't move. The forest itself seemed to resist, the roots crawling across the forest floor like serpents, moss shifting like it was alive. The dark figure advanced, and the whispers turned into a roar inside their heads, a chorus of lost souls. "You cannot leave. Not yet." The siblings turned to flee, plunging deeper into the labyrinthine forest. But every path they took twisted unnaturally, turning familiar landmarks into nightmarish distortions. Trees shifted subtly as they ran, trunks bending and twisting to block exits, roots coiling to trip their feet. Every sound, the snap of a branch, the rustle of leaves felt deliberate, as if the forest were alive and orchestrating their terror. Mara tripped over a root and fell forward, and in the brief moment she looked up. She saw faint figures standing just beyond the fog, headless, featureless, watching, waiting. Their bodies contorted unnaturally, limbs bent in ways that defied nature, and shadows stretched across the ground like dark rivers flowing toward her. A cold wind blew through the clearing, carrying the scent of decay and wet earth, whispering promises and threats all at once. The dark figure at the altar lifted its lantern again, the light cutting through the fog in a jagged, pulsating beam, revealing more shadows crawling across the edges of the forest. Mara and Leo ran blindly, the forest warping around them, whispering incessantly. Paths that once led to the edge now curved back into darkness. Time seemed to stretch. Seconds felt like minutes, minutes like hours. Then the siblings felt the oppressive gaze of unseen eyes on every side. Then, Mara stumbled into a small depression in the ground. The shadows seemed to recoil for a moment, the whispers faltering. A faint, distant sound reached them like a creek babbling, the real world calling. It was faint, but enough to give them a glimmer of hope. Still, the forest was patient. Whatever haunted Silver Hollow was old, cunning, and hungered for those who dared enter after midnight. As they pressed on, the glow of the dark figure's lantern vanished into the mist, leaving only the whispers, twisting trees, and creeping shadows behind. Mara and Leo had survived the first trial, but the woods had already marked them. The forest had chosen to remember them, and in its own sinister way, it had not finished with them. Mara and Leo stumbled blindly through the fog, the forest twisting and warping with every step. Familiar paths dissolved into labyrinths of gnarled roots and unnatural shadows. The whispers returned, louder, more insistent, echoing inside their skulls. Stay, belong, forever. Suddenly, Mara tripped over something hidden in the moss. A small, carved wooden token lay half buried in the dirt, glowing faintly with the same amber hue as the lantern figure. Instinctively, she picked it up. The moment her fingers touched it, the forest seemed to shift violently, trees bending toward them, their branches like skeletal fingers trying to ensnare the siblings. A cold, unnatural wind swept through, carrying voices, fragments of people who had disappeared years before. Some whispered warnings, others moaned in despair. Mara recognized one voice. It was old Mr. Calhoun, the town librarian who vanished a decade ago. Run or stay, his hollow voice warned. They ran until they reached the edge of a clearing where the shadows had congregated. The lantern figure stood at its center, taller and more defined now. The light from its lantern casting no shadows, bending the fog like it was alive. Its form pulsed, as though breathing, watching, waiting. Mara's hand tightened around the token, and a warmth radiated through her body, pushing back against the figure's influence. She realized the token was not just a key, was a tether to the real world. Gathering courage, she shouted, "Leo, we can't let it control us." The figure tilted its head, or what might have been a head responding, as if aware of their defiance. Shadows surged forward, snaking across the ground toward them, but Mara held the token high. A wave of light burst from it, forcing the shadows to recoil. Screeching in silence, they ran, token glowing brighter, until they saw the edge of the woods, the faint outline of the town beyond the trees. The whispers grew desperate, voices screaming in chorus. No. Stay, forever. Mara and Leo burst out of the forest, collapsing onto the dew-covered grass in the real hollow creek. The fog and whispers vanished instantly, leaving the forest silent and still. They looked back. The trees appeared normal, still and ancient, hiding their horrors behind ordinary bark. But something lingered. The token's glow dimmed, and Mara noticed faint footprints in the grass dark, twisted, unlike any human foot. The forest had followed them, marking them, a silent warning that it had not released its hold. At home, the siblings locked their doors, windows and closets, trying to convince themselves it was over. But that night, Mara awoke to a faint whisper in her room. "We'll meet again." And in the corner, a shadow curled impossibly, stretching toward the floor, pulsing like the lantern's light in the woods. Days later, the townsfolk spoke of new disappearances, vanishing, pets never returning, faint glimpses of figures in the forest at night. Mara and Leo understood, with growing dread, that the whispering woods didn't just claim the lost. It hunted, it waited, and it remembered those who defied it. Silver Hollow remained quiet by day, sleepy and mundane, but at night the forest's whispers returned to haunt the edges of the town. The lantern figure remained, unseen yet present, a silent predator. Mara kept the token hidden, knowing it was both a shield and a curse. She and Leo had survived, but the woods had changed them. They carried its memory. And perhaps, one night, the forest would come to collect its debt. The legend grew stronger, whispered among children daring each other to enter the woods. And sometimes, when the wind was right, the faint, amber glow of a lantern could be seen drifting just inside the trees. A chilling reminder that Silver Hollow's heart belonged to the shadows, and it would never let go.
Story 7. The Vanishing Lights of Hollow Ridge. Hollow Ridge was a tiny town perched on a series of rolling hills that stretched into a seemingly endless horizon. By day, it appeared tranquil, quiet streets, neat houses, a sleepy town that rarely saw visitors. But when night fell, whispers of the ridge's haunting would surface in hushed tones. Every local knew the stories, strange glowing orbs appearing in the dead of night, drifting across the hills, moving with a deliberate intelligence. Some said the lights lured people away, only for them to vanish without a trace, leaving behind frost-lined footprints that ended abruptly in the darkness. 17-year-old Nolan Graves had grown up hearing the tales. Around campfires, his friends spoke of the ridge as a dare, a thrill, something to test courage against. He had always dismissed them as superstition, a town's way of keeping people away from the dangerous woods and cliffs above. Yet that winter night, curiosity outweighed reason. He carried a flashlight, a small digital camera, and a backpack filled with snacks, prepared for a trek he knew might be dangerous. The sky above Hollow Ridge was unusually dark, the moon veiled by thin clouds that let only faint silver light through. As Nolan climbed the hill, he noticed an unnatural stillness. No wind rustled the trees, no distant howl or rustle of wildlife broke the silence. Even the stars seemed muted, swallowed by an unseen weight pressing down on the ridge. Then he saw it, a faint amber glow, dancing and shifting among the skeletal trees at the hill's crest. His pulse quickened. The glow pulsed gently, rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. He raised his camera, trying to steady his shaking hands, but the light flickered, moving away as he stepped closer. As he advanced, more lights appeared, hovering above the frost-covered ground, floating with smooth, impossible motion. They formed arcs, spirals, and patterns that seemed deliberate, as though they were orchestrating something he couldn't yet comprehend. Each movement coaxed him further from the safety of the familiar path, deeper into the unknown. A low, melodic whisper carried on the wind, unintelligible but hypnotic, urging him forward. The forest itself seemed alive, gnarled trees twisted toward the lights, branches clawing at the misty air, shadows stretching unnaturally across the ridge. The frost under his boots glimmered, reflecting the lights in fractured patterns, disorienting him. Finally, the lights led him into a small clearing, perfectly circular, frost glittering unnaturally even in the dim light. At the center, a low hum vibrated through the ground. Nolan's breath came in ragged gasps as he stepped closer. One of the lights descended, stopping just inches from his face. Its glow was soft but penetrating, revealing an almost humanoid figure, but faceless, smooth, and reflective, as if it were made of liquid light. A sudden chill swept through Nolan, sinking into his bones. The air thickened, the world outside the clearing seemed to vanish. From the darkness, shadowy shapes emerged from the tree-line. They moved with silent, precise grace, and yet Nolan felt their awareness, their attention, focusing entirely on him. The light pulsed, and suddenly the frost under his feet shifted into curling mist, climbing his ankles, cold and sticky, tugging at him toward the center. Panic surged, but he could barely move, the forest seemed to conspire against him. The orbs rose and descended, forming a spiral that drew him inward, toward something unknowable. Voices, no longer distant, filled his mind. Stay, follow, belong, forever. They were urgent, commanding, ancient. Nolan screamed, but the sound felt muted, swallowed by the ridge itself. He realized, with horror, that this was no playful supernatural phenomenon. The lights were alive, predators that fed on curiosity and fear. Anyone who followed them became part of the ridge, remembered and trapped within its unnatural patterns. The clearing seemed infinite, the shadows multiplying, forming twisted silhouettes of past victims, faces blurred, bodies contorted, frozen in silent screams. The orb's glow intensified, blinding and warm, yet utterly alien. Nolan's rational mind fought to escape, to turn back, but the ridge was patient and cunning. And then, the lights pulsed as one, creating a vertical beam that lifted him slightly off the ground. Frosty mist coiled around his feet, pulling him into the light, and the whispers crescendoed into an unbearable roar, echoing in his skull. For a moment, he saw fleeting images, other people he knew, trapped, reaching for him silently, their eyes empty but imploring. The lights recoiled and returned, circling him in a hypnotic dance. Nolan felt his mind strain under the pressure of the whispers, each pulse of light a command, each shadow a threat. His body felt heavy, but his fear sharpened his mind. Somewhere inside, a spark of defiance survived. The ridge had claimed many before, but this was just the beginning. For Nolan Graves, the vanishing lights of Hollow Ridge were no longer a story told by townsfolk, they were real, alive, and patient. And the ridge had already begun to mark him as its own. Nolan's pulse raced as the mist twisted around his legs, tugging him toward the center of the clearing. The amber orbs formed a swirling spiral, hovering just above the ground, pulsating in time with the whispers that echoed inside his skull. Every instinct screamed at him to run, yet his legs felt rooted, as if the ridge itself had claimed his body. Then he saw movement within the spiral. Shadows took shape, twisted, humanoid silhouettes that mirrored people he recognized from Hollow Ridge, old friends, neighbors, and even the town librarian who had vanished years ago. Their faces were pale, blurred, featureless, yet somehow familiar. Their eyes, empty voids, locked onto him with silent pleading and malice at once. The largest orb descended, now taking the form of a lantern-like figure, taller than any man, its light unnaturally warm yet cold in its presence. Nolan realized it was not just a light, it was the sentinel of the ridge, alive, aware, and watching him, testing him, waiting to see if he would resist or succumb. Desperation clawed at him. He fumbled in his backpack and found his camera. Raising it, he snapped a photo of the lantern figure. The flash erupted with unnatural brilliance, forcing the shadows to recoil. For a moment, Nolan felt a surge of hope, the ridge's grip faltered, and the orbs wavered. But then the ridge responded. The clearing seemed to elongate, growing taller and narrower, twisting the trees into impossible shapes. The ground beneath him rippled like liquid. Whispers became screams, swirling in his mind, follow, join, forever. His vision blurred, and the line between reality and the forest's illusion disappeared. In the chaos, Nolan spotted a faint glimmer on the frost, a carved wooden token partially buried under ice and moss, faintly glowing like the lantern figure. Instinctively, he lunged for it and clutched it tightly. Immediately, a wave of warmth surged through his body, cutting through the ridge's cold grip. The shadows recoiled violently, shrieking in silence as the token's glow expanded, illuminating the entire clearing. The lantern figure hesitated, its movement slower, deliberate, almost aware that its hold was challenged. Nolan dragged himself toward the token's protective light, forcing his way past the creeping mist and writhing shadows. Every step was agony, as if the forest itself resisted his escape, stretching the night and twisting his senses. Finally, he broke through the edge of the clearing. The mist thinned, the hill descended gently toward the familiar slope leading back to Hollow Ridge. The orbs hovered near the trees, watching, pulsing one last time before vanishing entirely into the fog. Nolan stumbled onto the frost-covered grass beyond the ridge, gasping, trembling, and soaked in sweat. The forest behind him stood silent, ordinary, as if nothing had occurred. Yet Nolan knew better. The ridge had marked him. The token remained warm in his hand, a tether to reality, a shield, and perhaps a warning. He glanced back at the hill under the moonlight. Faint, curling shadows seemed to dance at the tree lean, the whispering not quite gone. In the following days, Hollow Ridge seemed normal. People went about their routines, children played in the streets, and the air carried no hint of danger. But Nolan noticed small, unsettling signs, fleeting lights at the edges of his vision, shadows that lingered longer than they should, and the faint echo of whispers whenever he passed the ridge at night. Then the disappearances began anew. Animals vanished from backyards. Pets never returned from walks. And sometimes, townsfolk reported strange, amber glows on the hill, moving with impossible precision, vanishing just as quickly. Nolan realized the ridge's hunger never ceased, it did not forget. It only waited, patient and deliberate, for the next midnight wanderer to cross its path. He kept the token close, sleeping with it under his pillow, but some nights he awoke to a faint hum and a glow that pulsed from the corners of his room. Shadows lingered, curling subtly toward him. The ridge had released him, for now. But he understood the truth, once you glimpsed the vanishing lights, they never truly left you. Hollow Ridge had claimed a piece of him, and the whispering would follow, always, like a tide that never recedes. The town whispered of a boy who had stared into the lights and returned, changed, haunted, and vigilant. But the ridge waited. And one night, inevitably, the next wanderer would hear the call of the lights, and the hill would claim another soul.
Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Terror Mouth.